Meyer Lansky was one of the most well-known and notorious gangsters of the 20th century. From building a $100 million casino franchise to organizing and funding the formation of the National Crime Syndicate, Lansky used his shrewd business acumen and ruthless tenacity to transform the country in fairly meaningful ways. Don't get me wrong, Lansky is not a good man, and the things that he did to acquire and maintain the power that he held is truly sickening. However, we cannot deny the role that he played in shaping US history, in some ways for the better, and in others, for the worse. Lansky is typically referred to as the mob's accountant, but in my opinion, this name really doesn't do his influence justice. Lansky was a leader in the Jewish Mafia, and his net worth reached as high as $300 million during his lifetime. His story is one that's been glossed over countless times. I hope that we can shed a bit more light on this interesting, intimidating, and cunning man. As with all great stories, Lansky starts with humble beginnings. A Jewish immigrant to the US, he had a challenging childhood that was accompanied by a lot of hustle by him and his family just to get by. He was always an excellent student, very bright, as noted by his teachers. But given the area in which he lived in New York, his book smarts were partnered with a keen sense of how to live on the streets. As many good people who grow up in the ghetto will tell you, it's nearly impossible to avoid some confrontation with the police, regardless of how good you are. For Lansky, his first confrontation came at 18 years old when he was trying to do the right thing, and he got punished for it anyway. But this confrontation would also lead him to two of his most important partners and friends. As Lansky was walking by a deserted house, he heard a woman screaming. So he decided to investigate. Upon entering the house, he was met with a truly bizarre sight. On the floor of the house sprawled a boy about the age of 12, along with a woman, and it was obvious that they had just been having sex. Towering above them was the stern presence of a man, the woman's pimp, who proceeded to kick the woman. The boy and Lansky both charged the man, the boy armed with a small knife, and Lansky armed with a crowbar that he had been carrying in his toolbox. Lansky's crowbar made contact with the pimp's head. The police arrived, and after sorting everything out, sent the boy home. The boy's name was Bugsy Siegel, and he'll be an important partner for Lansky later on. Lansky and the pimp were taken to the station where they were interviewed. The pimp eventually got released. Lansky, on the other hand, well, he landed himself an assault charge. But the charge was dropped to a misdemeanor, and he basically got a slap on the wrist from the judge. Bugsy Siegel, who would earn the nickname Bugsy, became a devoted follower of Lansky. Fast forward a few years, and Lansky had started a floating craps game. But nobody was allowed to engage in illegal activity without the local crime boss, Joe Masseria, getting his cut. Joe Masseria sent a collector to get the profits from Lansky, but Lansky had other ideas. He hired a local strongman to deal with the collector, which subsequently resulted in an all-out brawl between the Jewish and Italian gangs. Lansky once again ended up in front of a judge. Outside the courthouse, Lansky was approached by a familiar face, the pimp from years earlier. The pimp didn't want to fight Lansky, and instead just wanted to talk to him. He introduced himself as Salvatore Lucania. Eventually, this man would come to be known as the notorious Lucky Luciano, another well-known crime lord. Lucky and Lansky worked out a deal. Even though they came from rival gangs, Lucky from the Italian mob and Lansky from the Jewish mob, they recognized that they were both incredibly ambitious and actually had more in common than they had differences. They formed an alliance. They would help each other in the future when the time was right for them to take over the mob. Lansky and Benjamin, now nicknamed Bugsy, formed a gang called the Bugs-meyer mob, which specialized in the illegal alcohol trade. The prohibition of the 1920s provided a unique opportunity for gangs to rise to power. At the time, Lansky was an auto mechanic working on the newly introduced Model T vehicles, which were getting more and more popular. This gave him an advantage. He knew how to fix the vehicles that the mob would use to transport their illegal cargo. He knew how to remove the serial numbers and any other identifying pieces of information about the vehicle. He could even change it so much that it would be unrecognizable to the original owners. But the Bugs-meyer mob was extremely enterprising, and they expanded their operation to not only running the alcohol themselves, but servicing other mobs' operations. Bugsy was an expert at stealing Model T cars, and Meyer could have the cars ready for purchase or rental within a few hours. Eventually, they started contracting out their bootlegging services to anyone who needed shipments coordinated. They could provide the manpower needed to get the cargo from point A to point B without issue. Lansky started recruiting young and ruthless men for the job, and their mob started to grow. A key part of their success was how effectively they ran their business. The world of the mob was full of cutthroats and backstabbers, but not the Bugs-meyer mob. Lansky was well known as one of the most honest players in the business. If he made a promise or deal, he would keep it. This was a rare quality to have, and it propelled his criminal enterprise forward. But that doesn't mean that they weren't as violent and ruthless as the other mobs. If their business partners didn't follow through, or they were screwed over by an employee, Bugsy and Lansky would ensure that the offending party was punished. They were actually known as one of the most violent mobs at the time. People would disappear, never to be seen again. In the world of the Mafia, territory is everything. So when two opposing Italian mobs started to encroach on one another's territories, things started to get ugly. Lucky belonged to the Mafia of the boss of all bosses, Joe Masseria. The opposing mob was run by Salvatore Maranzano, who decided that the best way to get to Joe the boss was through his right-hand man, Lucky. Lucky was taken hostage, beaten, and driven around the city in Maranzano's personal vehicle, while they tried to get information out of him. Bugsy and Lansky noticed something was up, but they didn't want to do anything that could potentially hurt themselves or Lucky. Finally, once Maranzano had left the vehicle, they had their chance. They cut off the vehicle as it drove away and blew Maranzano's boys to bits. Lucky escaped with his life, and this experience was actually how he was given the nickname Lucky. This wasn't the last time that Lucky got involved with the head honchos of the Mafia. He still had big plans to take over the whole operation, and eventually he decided that it was time to off his own boss, Joe. Lucky organized a dinner with Joe at a diner, and behind the scenes, he had organized an attack with Lansky and Bugsy. In typical Lansky fashion, he remained behind the scenes, letting other, more ruthless thugs do his bidding. But Bugsy was out for blood. When Lucky excused himself to go to the bathroom, Bugsy and 4 other men entered the diner and shot Masseria at his table. Lucky had smartly excused himself so that no other Mafia member could accuse him of having any physical part in the murder, and doing so also helped him avoid any jail time. Lucky was quick to try to steal the power of Masseria for himself, but Maranzano's influence in the Italian Mafia was too great. In the end, Maranzano was selected as the new boss of bosses, and he put a hit out on several people responsible for Masseria's death, including Lucky. But Lucky had a trick up his sleeve, the alliance with the Bugs-meyer mob, which up until this point had been kept secret. He once again called in a favor to Lansky. Lansky knew that getting the old world bosses out of the way would be a good thing for his operation, for his plans for the National Crime Syndicate, so he conceded. He would help Lucky kill Maranzano. The boys of the Bugs-meyer mob went to the office of Maranzano and pretended to be federal agents. When it was clear that they had found their man, they took Maranzano to his office and attempted to strangle him. But Maranzano wasn't going to give up without a fight. Being a large man, he got loose of his captor's clutches, but he was no match for their guns and bullets. They emptied their pistols into him, and Maranzano was no more. The year was 1931, and the last of the old world Mafia members had been killed. The new, Americanized Mafia was ready to take shape. Lansky's vision was being realized. With the Italian Mafia under control, Lansky set his sights on a bigger prize. Because he wasn't directly connected to the Italian Mafia like Lucky, his mob had worked with many different gangs in other cities like Cleveland, Detroit, and Miami. An idea started to take shape in his head. Why stop at controlling just one city? Why not control them all by setting up an organization of crime that spanned state lines? It was an ambitious idea to be sure, but Lansky was just the man to do it. He had built up a reputation for being honest and reliable since the beginning. He had friends in many different places. He found a great partner in a man named Johnny Torrio, who had similar ambitions regarding coordinating the various gangs in Chicago, one of which was controlled by the infamous Al Capone. The gangs there were splintered, caught up in the endless fight for control over territory. Torrio gave Lansky some expert advice on the subject, advice that Lansky would remember forever. There are 2 ways to power. Al Capone can rule for a while by blood and terror, but there will always be some who fight him with his own weapons. On the other hand, the man who can make money, big money, for others will eventually be regarded as indispensable. Lansky would use this mantra for years to come as he developed the National Crime Syndicate. He started facilitating discussions between the various crime families in the disparate cities, setting up joint business ventures that would be profitable for all. The legalization of alcohol in 1933 played a massive role in making the National Crime Syndicate possible. Lansky's previous success as a liquor distributor made his operation a prime contender for legal liquor market domination, and they capitalized on it. The simple action of alcohol legalization put the mob into big business in a big way. They were in a position to make all of their friends lots of money. In 1934, an incredibly important meeting was held. It was the meeting to officially organize the National Crime Syndicate. Lansky had worked for years to establish working relations with various gangs across the country, including those in Cleveland, Minneapolis, Kansas City, and all places in between. At the meeting, the various crime lords set out to organize operations across the cities in which they had territory. They worked out which gangs would own which industries, such as prostitution, gambling, liquor, and what the territories would be. They also agreed to stop indiscriminate killings amongst one another. Instead, if killing was necessary, they would call in the enforcement arm of the syndicate to do the dirty work. This execution squad would come to be known as Murder, Inc. Additionally, the commission would oversee inter-city killings, which would only be granted with express consent. The formation of the syndicate was only the beginning. Together, the NCS would be responsible for countless murders, the rise of the mob in key industries, and even the election of public officials. As for Meyer Lansky, his story is far from over. Join us next week for the exciting conclusion to his story as we uncover how he was instrumental in the rise of the National Crime Syndicate's power, how he built his gambling empire, and the betrayals and atrocities he committed along the way.
Did I enjoy it? Oh, sure, it was profitable too.